My name is Liesl Schoenberg. I am 36 years old. I work in commercial real estate development in Phoenix, Arizona. I have been doing this for 12 years. I started as an analyst at 24. I am now, as of 14 months ago, the Chief Investment Officer at the firm where I work, which I am going to call Sterling Halsey Properties because the actual name of the firm is the kind of detail that the lawyers I keep on retainer would prefer I not put on the internet. I went to ASU for undergrad. I did my MBA at night while working full-time. I have done $470 million in development deals over my career. I am, by every external measure, the kind of woman the commercial real estate industry has been quietly pretending to encourage for the last 15 years while actually doing very little to make the encouragement structural. 2 years ago, I was a senior vice president at the firm. The chief investment officer at the time was my husband. His name was Garrett. He had been the CIO since 2019. He had gotten the role the year we got married. He had gotten it because he was good at his job and because he was charming in the specific way that men in commercial real estate need to be charming, and because the founder of the firm, a man named Walt Halsey, had liked him personally for almost a decade. The woman who had been Garrett's executive assistant since 2020 was a 32-year-old named Sarafina Quintero. Sarafina was the third executive assistant Garrett had hired during my time at the firm. I had not been involved in any of the hiring decisions. The CIO's executive assistant was a position that reported to the CIO and the CIO alone. I had, in 2020, met Sarafina in passing during her first week, in the kitchen on the 12th floor, where she had introduced herself to me with the specific warm formality of someone who knew that the CIO's wife was going to be a person of interest in her professional life. I had liked her. I had liked her for the next 3.5 years. I had liked her in the way that women in their 30s like other women in their 30s when they have been told that this woman is the executive assistant to their husband, and they are operating under the polite professional assumption that the relationship is, and is going to remain, a professional one. That assumption was wrong. I want to tell you when the assumption became wrong. I do not actually know exactly. The investigators who eventually documented the timeline gave me a range. The range was somewhere between July of 2022 and October of 2022. The Christmas party I am about to describe was December of 2023. By the Christmas party, the affair had been going on for between 14 and 17 months. I had not noticed. I want to be clear about that. I had not noticed in the way most women in my position do not notice. I had noticed small things. The phone he held a little too close to his chest. A trip he had taken to a conference in San Diego in September that did not appear on the conference's official program when I had, in a moment of quiet curiosity, looked it up. A pair of cufflinks I did not remember buying him. I had filed the small things away. I had not yet named what they were. I was busy. I had been promoted that summer to executive vice president of the multifamily division. I was running 3 of the firm's largest active deals. I had, that fall, been told privately by Walt Halsey that he was beginning to think about who would succeed him as president of the firm in the next 2 to 3 years, and that I was on the short list. I had been telling myself, the entire fall, that the small things were just small things. The Christmas party was at a private club in Paradise Valley. The firm rented out the main ballroom every December. The party was, in the local commercial real estate community, considered the second most important industry event of the year after the May groundbreaking gala that the regional NAIOP chapter held at the Arizona Biltmore. 230 people were at the Christmas party in 2023. The firm's employees and their partners. Major brokers. Bank executives. The mayor's chief of staff. The kind of crowd that, in commercial real estate, you put on your best behavior for. Garrett and I had gotten dressed at home together. He had, while I was putting on my earrings, told me I looked beautiful. He had been wearing the cufflinks I did not remember buying him. He had kissed the top of my head. He had told me he loved me. We had driven to the party together. We had walked into the ballroom together. I had spent the first hour and a half of the party doing what the wife of the CIO does at the firm's Christmas party, which is to say making polite conversation with the wives of clients and answering questions about the deals I was running and laughing at the same 5 jokes I had been hearing every December for 9 years. Around 9:30, I had gone to the restroom. The restrooms at the club were on the lower level. I had taken the back staircase down because the front staircase had a small line of women waiting, and I had been to this club enough times to know that the back staircase emptied out into a quieter hallway by the small members' bar that very few people at the party would have known about. I had walked down the back staircase. I had turned the corner at the bottom. I had seen, in the small alcove between the back staircase and the members' bar, my husband Garrett kissing Sarafina Quintero against the wall. I want to give you the specific details of what I saw, because the specific details are the part of this story that I, in the months that followed, used to maintain my own clarity when the people around me began to suggest that I might be misremembering. He had one hand against the wall above her head. His other hand was on the side of her face. She was wearing a wine-colored silk dress that I had complimented her on earlier in the evening when I had passed her by the bar. His eyes were closed. Her hand was on his lower back, holding the fabric of his suit jacket in a fist. This was not a first kiss. This was a kiss that had been happening, in similar walls in similar alcoves in similar hallways, for a long time. I had stood at the corner of the staircase for perhaps 4 seconds. Neither of them had seen me. I had turned around. I had walked back up the back staircase. I had returned to the ballroom. I had walked across the ballroom to the bar. I had ordered a club soda with lime. I had taken my drink to the side of the room where Walt Halsey was standing with his wife Maribel and the chief financial officer Pam Driscoll and Pam's husband. I had joined the conversation. I had laughed at a joke Walt was telling. I had been pleasant for the next 45 minutes. I had spotted Garrett, when he eventually re-entered the ballroom, walking with the specific casual unhurried pace of a man who had just returned from the men's room. I had watched him scan the room, find me, register that I was in conversation with the founder of the firm and the CFO, and decide to leave me to it. I had spotted Sarafina, 10 minutes later, re-entering through a different door. She had gone to the bar. She had ordered a glass of champagne. She had spent the rest of the evening on the opposite side of the room from me. I had stayed at the party until 11:15. I had ridden home with my husband. I had gone to bed. I had said nothing. I want you to hold that detail. I want you to hold it because the holding is the part of this story that I think the women watching tonight will most need to absorb. I said nothing. I said nothing not because I did not know what I had seen. I said nothing because the moment I said something was the moment Garrett and Sarafina got to start running the play they had clearly been preparing in advance for the moment when I found out. The moment I said something was the moment the conversation became their conversation. The moment I said something was the moment the pace of what came next was decided by them and not by me. I had been a senior executive in commercial real estate for 12 years. I had learned, in those 12 years, the specific value of not announcing what you knew until you were ready to use what you knew. I was not yet ready. I needed information. I needed time. I needed the kind of legal and financial preparation that Christmas Eve at home with my husband was not the right setting for. So I said nothing. I went to sleep beside Garrett that night. I did not sleep well, but I did not toss. I did not cry. I did not stare at the ceiling. I lay on my side, with my back to him, and I stared at the small patch of street light on the wall, and I thought, very calmly, The first calm thought I had thought in 11 months, which had been the 11 months in which I had been quietly noticing the small things without naming what they were. I thought, he has been planning this for over a year. I thought, I'm going to need 90 days. I thought, I am going to spend 90 days the way men like Garrett do not expect women like me to spend them. I went to sleep. The next morning, while Garrett was in the shower, I made coffee. I went to the small office off the kitchen that I had set up for years earlier when I had been getting my MBA, and that Garrett had never bothered to spend much time in. I closed the door. I picked up my phone. I called a woman named Rosalind Agbayarni. Rosalind was a divorce attorney in Phoenix. She had been recommended to me 18 months earlier, in the casual way these recommendations come, by another woman in the industry named Joelle Ferrante, who had used Rosalind for her own divorce 2 years before that and who had told me, at the time, with the specific careful look of a woman delivering important information for later use, that if I ever needed her, this was the person. I had filed the recommendation away. I had not called her until that morning. She picked up at 7:32 on a Sunday. She said, "This is Rosalind." I said, "Rosalind. My name is Liesl Schönberg. Joelle Ferrante told me to call you 18 months ago if I ever needed you. I need you." She said, "Where are you?" I said, "I am at home." "He is in the shower." She said, "Liesl, listen to me. Do not say anything to him this morning. Get out of the house if you can. Pretend you have a business breakfast. Go anywhere. A coffee shop. A grocery store. A parking lot. Stay out for 2 hours. Call me back at 9 when you are alone. We will talk." I said, "Rosalind, I'm very calm." She said, "Liesl, I can hear that you are calm. The calmness is going to be useful. I want to give you instructions before the calmness becomes anything else. Do you have a small bag of essentials you could grab on your way out the door?" I said, "I keep a small overnight bag in the closet for business travel." She said, "Take it. Take it because if anything escalates today, you may not want to come back to the house tonight. I am not telling you you have to leave. I am telling you to have the option." I said, "Rosalind, I will take it." She said, "Call me at 9. I hung up. I went to the kitchen. I refilled my coffee. I went upstairs. Garrett was at the bathroom mirror, shaving. I told him I had completely forgotten about a breakfast meeting with the asset manager from the Sun Devil Capital deal who was flying out at noon. I told him I would be back by 11:30. I told him I would meet him for the lunch we had been planning at his parents' house in Scottsdale. He said, "Liesl, on a Sunday morning?" I said, "Garrett, the deal closes Wednesday. He flies out at noon. There is no other window." He said, "All right." He kissed me on the cheek. I went into the closet. I took the small overnight bag. I added 2 changes of clothes to it. I added my passport. I added the small flash drive I kept in a coat pocket that contained, encrypted, the 17 most important professional and personal files of my life. I left the house at 7:58. I drove to a Starbucks in Temp that Garrett had never been to in our 9 years of marriage. I called Rosalind back at 9. We spoke for 43 minutes. I want to tell you what we agreed. We agreed on 3 things. The first was that I was going to spend the next 30 days doing nothing. I was not going to confront Garrett. I was not going to confront Sarafina. I was not going to tell my mother. I was not going to tell my sister. I was not going to tell my closest friend at the firm, a woman named Audra Whitaker, whom I had been having lunch with every Tuesday for 6 years. I was going to behave, externally, exactly the way I had behaved for the last 11 months. I was going to come home from work. I was going to make dinner. I was going to laugh at the small jokes. I was going to be, in every observable way, the wife who had not noticed. The second was that, in those 30 days, Rosalind was going to retain a private investigator named Doreen Haldeman. Doreen was 61 years old. He had been a Phoenix police detective for 23 years before retiring into private practice. He was, Rosalind told me, the most discreet investigator in the southwestern United States for high-stakes matrimonial work. His 30-day retainer would produce a complete documentation of the timeline of the affair, the financial impact on our marital accounts, and any additional information that might be relevant to what came next. The third was that, in those 30 days, I was going to begin the quiet work of separating my professional life from Garrett's. Rosalind said, "Liesl, I want to be very direct with you about something." I said, "Yes." She said, "You are an executive vice president at a firm where your husband is the chief investment officer. The firm is private. The founder is a personal friend of your husband's. The political dynamics of what is about to happen are going to require careful management, because the way Garrett and Sarafina are exposed is going to determine, in part, what happens to your job." She said, "I want you to think about whether you want to stay at the firm after this, or whether you want to leave." She said, "There is no wrong answer. But the answer is going to shape the strategy." I sat with the question. I sat with it for a long moment. I said, "Rosalind, I want to stay at the firm." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I have spent 12 years building a career at this firm. Because I am in line for the presidency. Because the deals I am running are the most important deals of my career to date. Because if I leave the firm, I am letting Garrett and Sarafina take from me not just my marriage but the professional life I have built independently of the marriage." I said, "I want to keep my career. I want to keep my relationship with Walt Halsey. I want to keep the deals I am running. I want, specifically, to be the version of this story that ends with Garrett gone and Sarafina gone and Liesl Schönberg sitting in the corner office on the 17th floor." She said, "Liesl, that is the right answer." She said, "It is also the harder answer." She said, "It means that, when the moment comes, we are going to have to expose Garrett and Sarafina in a way that does not damage the firm. We are going to have to do it in a way that preserves Walt Halsey's relationship with you. We are going to have to do it in a way that demonstrates, beyond any doubt, that Garrett's behavior was professional misconduct that violated the firm's code of conduct, and that the consequences flowed from that misconduct rather than from any personal action of yours." She said, "That is a more delicate operation than a straightforward divorce. But it is achievable." She said, "I have done it before." She said, "I am going to do it for you." I said, "Rosalind, thank you." She said, "Liesl, there is one more thing." I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you have any reason to believe that Sarafina has been receiving anything from Garrett that she should not have been receiving in her official capacity at the firm? Salary irregularities, bonuses, travel reimbursements, anything?" I said, "I do not know. I have not had any reason to look." She said, "Doreen is going to look. If there is anything there, it is going to materially change what is available to us when the time comes." She said, "Go to your in-law's lunch this afternoon. Eat the food. Make polite conversation. Do not give Garrett any reason to think anything has changed. Drive home with him tonight. Sleep beside him. Make him breakfast in the morning. She said, be the wife who has not noticed for 30 more days. She said, then we are going to begin making changes. I drove to my in-law's house in Scottsdale. I ate the chicken cacciatore my mother-in-law had made for the third Sunday in a row that fall. I made polite conversation with Garrett's father about the Cardinals' chances of making the playoffs. I helped my mother-in-law clean the kitchen afterward. I asked Garrett if he wanted to leave by 3 so we could stop at the grocery store on the way home. He kissed my forehead in the kitchen of his mother's house at 2:47 in the afternoon. I let him. I let him because the wife who had not noticed would have let him. I was the wife who had not noticed for 30 more days. That was the assignment. I was going to do it. Doreen's first report came on a Tuesday morning, 12 days after the Christmas party. We met at Rosalind's office at 9 in the morning. Doreen was a tall man in his early 60s with the specific calm presence of a former police detective who had learned that the most useful position in any conversation was the one where you spoke the least and observed the most. He wore a grey sport coat and khaki trousers and shoes that had been polished that morning. He looked, when he sat down across from me at the conference table, like a man who had just spent 12 days documenting the worst weeks of my life and who had no particular emotional response to any of it. That was the response I needed. He opened a leather portfolio. He said, Mrs. Schoenberg, the relationship between your husband and Sarafina Quintero began in late August of 2022. We have established this with high confidence based on hotel records, parking garage logs, and credit card receipts that we will discuss in detail. He said, the relationship has involved approximately 114 documented in-person encounters over the past 16 months. The encounters have taken place in 3 primary locations. A hotel near the airport during business hours on Wednesdays and Thursdays. The conference suite at the firm's office on the 12th floor on 6 occasions when the firm's security cameras were undergoing scheduled maintenance, the maintenance schedule of which your husband, as CIO, would have had access to. And a short-term rental apartment in a building in Temp that your husband has been paying for, in cash, for the past 11 months. He said, the total cost of the affair to your marital accounts, in directly traceable expenses, is approximately $51,000. He said, Mrs. Schoenberg, that is not the part one want to focus on. He said, the part one want to focus on is what is happening with Sarafina Quintero's compensation at the firm. He turned the page in his portfolio. He said, Sarafina Quintero was hired in March of 2020 as your husband's executive assistant. Her starting salary was $62,000. By industry standards for an executive assistant at a real estate firm of Sterling Hall's size, that was a market rate starting salary. He said, in December of 2020, she received her first end-of-year bonus. $8,000. He said, in April of 2021, she received a salary adjustment to $71,000. The adjustment was processed by your husband personally. It was approved through the firm's standard review process. He said, in November of 2021, she received an off-cycle bonus. $11,000. This bonus was approved by your husband and signed off by the Human Resources Director without going through the standard performance review process. The HR Director, when we interviewed her informally last week, told us that off-cycle bonuses for executive assistants were unusual but not unheard of, and that she had not flagged the bonus at the time. He said, in June of 2022, she received another salary adjustment to $86,000. This was, again, approved by your husband personally. He said, in December of 2022, she received an end-of-year bonus of $19,000. He said, in June of 2023, Her salary was adjusted to $98,000. He said, in November of 2023, 3 weeks before the Christmas party you have described, she received an off-cycle bonus of $24,000. He paused. He said, Mrs. Schoenberg. The total compensation Sarafina Quintero has received from Sterling Halsey Properties since the beginning of her employment, after the bonuses and adjustments, is approximately $312,000 more than the median compensation for executive assistants at comparable Phoenix real estate firms over the same period. He said, the bonuses, in particular, follow a specific pattern. Each one was issued within 10 to 14 days of a documented private encounter between your husband and Ms. Quintero. The pattern is not coincidental. He said, Mrs. Schoenberg. What we have here is not just an affair. He said, what we have is the systematic misuse of company funds to compensate a personal partner for the conduct of a personal affair. He said, this is a fireable offense at any commercial real estate firm in the United States. It is also, depending on how it is framed, potentially a matter for the firm's audit committee and possibly for outside regulators. I sat at Rosalind's conference table. I sat with a report. I want to tell you what I felt, because the feeling is the part of this story that I think about most often. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the specific small thrill that some women describe feeling when they discover that the man who has been betraying them is also exposing himself to professional consequences he has not yet considered. I felt very tired. I felt very tired because the report was confirming, in the cold quantitative language of a forensic financial analysis, what I had been suspecting for 2 weeks but had not yet been able to articulate. Garrett had not just been having an affair. Garrett had been using the firm I had spent 12 years building my career at as the financial mechanism for the affair. Garrett had been treating Sarafina's compensation, which the firm's other employees had been earning through their actual work, as his personal slush fund for purchasing the woman he was sleeping with. The firm I worked at had been paying for my husband's affair. I had been part of the firm. I had been part of the firm that was paying for my husband's affair. That detail was the one that took the longest to absorb. Rosalind watched my face. She said, Liesl. Take a moment. I took a moment. I drank some water. I said, Rosalind. What do we do? She said, we have options. The options are different than they would be if this were just an affair. She said, option 1 is divorce, with the financial misconduct as leverage to ensure a favorable settlement. Garrett's misuse of company funds will be a factor in the divorce because it represents a depletion of marital assets, and the firm will likely have civil claims against him to recover the bonuses paid in bad faith. We will not need to expose the misconduct publicly to use it. The threat of exposure is itself the leverage. She said, option 2 is divorce with disclosure to the firm. We bring the documentation to Walt Halsey. We let the firm's audit committee handle the consequences. Garrett is fired for cause. Sarafina is fired for cause. The firm pursues whatever recovery actions it chooses to pursue. You and I file for divorce in parallel. She said, option 3 is the slowest and the most strategic. We bring the documentation to Walt Halsey privately. We give him the opportunity to manage the consequences in a way that protects the firm. He decides what happens to Garrett and Sarafina based on his own judgment about what serves the firm's interests. We support whatever he decides. In return, we make sure that your standing at the firm is enhanced rather than damaged by the exposure. She paused. She said, Liesl. I want to recommend option 3. I said, why? She said, because option 3 is the option that uses the misconduct as a tool for the future you want, rather than as a weapon for the punishment of the past. Option 1 keeps the misconduct private. Garrett moves on. Sarafina moves on. They both, eventually, find new jobs in the industry, and you have to spend the rest of your career running into them at conferences. Option 2 punishes them publicly but at the cost of being seen, by some people in the industry, as the woman who burned down her husband's career. The reputational consequence to you is real, even if the legal consequence to him is also real. She said, Option 3 positions you, with Walt Halsey, as the executive who handled the most delicate situation of her career with discretion, judgment, and the firm's interests at heart. It positions Walt as the founder who managed a difficult internal matter cleanly. It positions Garrett as the executive who left the firm. It positions Sarafina as the assistant who left the firm. It positions you as the executive who is, after the dust has settled, ready to step into the next role. She said, Walt is going to remember, for the rest of his life, that you were the executive who came to him with this rather than around him. She said, that memory is going to be worth more to you, in the next 20 years of your career, than any settlement you could extract through Option 1 or any public satisfaction you could extract through Option 2. She said, I have done this 3 times in my career. The third option always wins. I sat at the conference table. I considered the 3 options. I want to tell you what I considered, because the consideration is the part of this story that I think mattered most. I considered Option 1. I considered the version of my life in which Garrett walked away from the firm with his career intact and built a new one somewhere else, possibly with Sarafina, possibly without, while I had to spend the next 20 years pretending the misconduct had not happened. I considered the small daily indignity of running into him at industry events. I considered the way the silence would, over time, ferment into a kind of permanent low-grade resentment that I would carry into every future relationship. I considered Option 2. I considered the version where the exposure was public. I considered the satisfaction of reading about Garrett's firing in the Phoenix Business Journal. I considered the small calls I would receive from women in the industry telling me they had always known. I considered, also, the small calls I would not receive from people who had decided, in the privacy of their own offices, that I was the kind of woman who did not handle these things internally. I considered the way the public exposure would mark me, for the rest of my career, as a woman whose marriage had ended in scandal. I considered Option 3. I considered the version where Walt Halsey looked across his desk at me and understood, in the specific way that founders of family-built firms understand things, that I had brought him a problem he had not known he had and that I had brought it to him in a way that gave him the dignity of solving it himself. I considered the way that conversation would, in the long quiet years that followed, shape the trajectory of my career. I said, Rosalind. We do Option 3. She said, Liesl. That is the right answer. She said, I'm going to call Walt's secretary tomorrow morning. I'm going to request a private meeting for you with Walt by the end of next week. We are going to prepare for that meeting in detail. You are going to walk into Walt's office with the documentation in a clean folder and a clear, calm presentation of what you found and how you found it. She said, we are going to prepare you to do this conversation in a way that is professional, that is restrained, and that is, above all else, useful to Walt. She said, this is a business meeting. The fact that it is also the most personal conversation of your life does not change that it is a business meeting. I said, Rosalind. I understand. I met with Walt the following Wednesday. His office was on the 17th floor. The corner office. The office I am sitting in right now, recording this. The office that, on that Wednesday in January, was Walt's. His secretary, Edith, who had been Walt's secretary for 31 years, brought me in at 10 in the morning. She closed the door. Walt was standing at the window when I came in. He had been looking at the view of downtown Phoenix that the corner office had been built around. He turned around. He said, Liesel. Edith said you needed to see me about a sensitive matter. I said, Walt. I do. He said, sit down. I sat down. I had practiced this opening with Rosalind for 90 minutes the night before. I said, Walt. 3 weeks ago at the Christmas party, I saw my husband, who is your CIO, kissing his executive assistant in a back hallway. I did not say anything to him at the time. Instead, I retained an attorney and a private investigator. I have spent the last 3 weeks documenting the situation. The documentation is in this folder. I'm giving the folder to you. I slid the folder across his desk. I said, I am giving it to you because what is in this folder is no longer just my marriage. It is also a matter that involves the firm. I have not raised this with anyone else at the firm. I am raising it with you because I believe you would want to know, and because I believe you are the right person to decide what the firm does with what is in the folder. I said, I am going to leave the room. I am going to ask Edith to put me on her calendar to come back at 4 o'clock this afternoon. By 4 o'clock, you will have read the folder. You will have decided how you want to handle it. We will discuss it then. I said, Walt. I want you to know one thing before I leave the room. He said, yes. I said, I am going to support whatever decision you make about Garrett and Sarafina. I am going to support it because the decision is yours to make. I am also going to file for divorce, separately, regardless of what the firm decides. I said, I want you to make the firm's decision based on the firm's interests. I do not want you to make it based on what you think will be easier for me. I'm going to be okay either way. I said, I have been a senior executive at this firm for 12 years. I am a senior executive in this conversation right now. I came to you in this conversation as a senior executive. I am asking you to receive me in this conversation in the same way. Walt looked at me across his desk. He did not pick up the folder for a long moment. He said, Liesel. I said, yes. He said, I have known you since you were an analyst. I said, yes. He said, I have watched you for 12 years. I said, yes. He said, I am going to read this folder. I am going to think about it. I am going to handle it. We will speak at 4. He said, Liesel. One thing. I said, yes. He said, thank you for coming to me with this. Thank you for the way you came. Thank you for the calmness with which you have just spoken to me. He said, I want you to know that I have been thinking about you for the last 6 months as the next president of this firm. He said, this conversation has not changed that. He said, this conversation, if anything, has confirmed it. I left his office. I went to my own office on the 15th floor. I closed the door. I sat at my desk. I did not cry. The crying had finished in the small staged amounts I had allowed myself in the 3 weeks since the Christmas party. I worked for 6 hours. I went back up to Walt's office at 4. What we discussed and what was decided is the part of this story that I am going to tell you next. Walt's decision was both faster and more thorough than I had expected. By the time I returned to his office at 4, he had read the folder twice. He had spent the intervening 6 hours making 3 phone calls. The first had been to the firm's outside counsel, a man at one of the large Phoenix law firms whom Walt had used for sensitive personnel matters for the last 15 years. The second had been to the firm's auditor. The third had been to Pam Driscoll, the chief financial officer, who had agreed to come into the office over the weekend to conduct a formal forensic review of the bonus and salary records for Sarafina Quintero. Walt did not invite me to sit when I came back. He was standing at the window again, looking at the same view he had been looking at when I had entered 6 hours earlier. He turned around. He said, "Liesl, here is what is going to happen." He said, "On Monday morning, our outside counsel is going to deliver a letter to Garrett's office requesting his immediate resignation as Chief Investment Officer. The letter will reference the documented misuse of company funds. The letter will offer Garrett the option of resigning quietly, returning the bonuses paid to Sarafina in excess of comparable market compensation, signing a non-disclosure agreement, and walking away from the firm with no further consequences." He said, "The alternative is that the firm refers the matter to the Audit Committee. The Audit Committee then refers it to outside auditors. The outside auditors are obligated to report it to certain regulators. We do not want any of that. We want the quiet exit. We will give Garrett the opportunity to take it." He said, "My expectation is that he will take it. His attorney, when he gets one, will tell him to take it." He said, "Sarafina Quintero will be terminated for cause on the same Monday morning. Her termination will reference, in writing, the firm's code of conduct regarding workplace relationships with executives in her direct reporting chain. Her severance will consist of 2 weeks of pay. The termination letter will note that the firm reserves the right to pursue civil recovery of the off-cycle bonuses she received under circumstances that violated the firm's standards. We do not actually plan to pursue the recovery. The notation is leverage to keep her quiet." He said, "We will issue a brief internal announcement on Tuesday saying that Garrett has resigned for personal reasons and that Sarafina is no longer with the firm. We will not elaborate. The industry will, within 48 hours, work out approximately what happened. They will not have the specific details. They will not need them. The information that will travel through the industry will be that Garrett left under circumstances and that Sarafina is no longer in real estate development in Arizona." He said, "For your part, Liesl." I said, "Yes." He said, "I am going to announce, on Wednesday, that the firm is appointing an interim chief investment officer." He said, "The interim chief investment officer is going to be you." He said, "The appointment will be presented as a decision the firm has been considering for some time, accelerated by Garrett's resignation. The appointment will be effective immediately. It will come with the corresponding compensation adjustment, the corresponding equity adjustment, and the corresponding seat on the firm's investment committee." He said, "At the end of 6 months, we will convert the interim appointment to permanent." He said, "At the end of 2 years, we will begin the formal succession planning process for the presidency of the firm." He said, "Liesl, I want to be clear about something." I said, "Yes." He said, "I am not appointing you CIO because of what your husband did. I am appointing you because you are the most capable senior executive at this firm. I would have appointed you CIO in the next 18 months regardless. The events of the last 3 weeks have only changed the timing." He said, "I want you to hear me say that out loud, because I do not want you to spend the next 10 years wondering whether the appointment was an act of pity or compensation. It was neither. The appointment is professional. The promotion is professional. Your career here is professional." He said, "What your husband did was personal misconduct that had professional consequences. The professional consequences for him are not connected to the professional opportunities for you. The two things are happening at the same time. They are not the same thing." He said, "Do you understand the difference?" I said, "Walt, I do." He said, "Good." He said, "Sit down." I sat down. He sat down across from me. He said, "Liesl, there is one more thing I want to say to you." He said, "I have been the founder and president of this firm for 34 years. I have, in those 34 years, watched a great many marriages between people who worked here come together and come apart. I have watched 4 CIOs come and go. I have watched 17 executive assistants come and go. I have watched, more times than I would like to admit, men in senior positions at this firm conduct affairs with women in junior positions at this firm." He said, "I have never, until this morning, had the wife of one of those men come into my office with a folder." He said, "I have always known these things were happening. I have not always been told. The not being told has been, in retrospect, a kind of slow corrosion of the firm's culture that I have not been able to address because I have not been able to officially see what I unofficially knew." He said, "You did me a service this morning, Liesl. I want you to know that." He said, "You allowed me to see, formally, what I have unofficially seen for many years. You allowed me to do something about it. You allowed me to act with the authority that the firm's structure gives me, but that the firm's culture has, for years, prevented me from using." He said, "I am going to use that authority going forward. I am going to use it because of the way you came to me this morning." He said, "That is also part of why I am promoting you." He said, "You are the kind of senior executive who brings difficult information into rooms where the information needs to be brought. That is a quality that this firm has been short on for a long time. I want more of it at the top of this firm. I want you at the top of this firm." I sat across from Walt. I had not expected the speech. I said, "Walt, thank you." He said, "Liesl, go home tonight. Or do not go home, depending on what your situation requires. Take Friday off. Take all of next week off if you need it. We will manage Garrett's exit on Monday without you in the building. You return on Wednesday morning, when the announcement of your interim appointment goes out." He said, "When you return on Wednesday, you return as the CIO. Everything that happens here is going to be, from that day forward, the result of decisions you make." He said, "Welcome to the chair." He stood up. He walked around his desk. He shook my hand. I left his office. I went home. Garrett was at home. He had been at the firm earlier that day. He did not yet know what was coming on Monday morning. I had a small overnight bag in the trunk of my car that Rosalind had instructed me to keep there in case I needed it. I did not bring the bag in. I made dinner. We ate. We watched a basketball game. We went to bed. I lay beside my husband for the last time on a Wednesday night in January. I did not sleep. I want to tell you about the conversation on Monday morning, because the conversation is the part of this story that I think the women watching tonight will most need to hear. On Monday morning, Garrett went to the office at his usual time. I did not go to the office. I stayed home. Rosalind had arranged for me to be in her office by 9, with the divorce filing already prepared, ready to be filed the moment I gave her the word. The letter from outside counsel was delivered to Garrett's office at 9:15. He called me at 9:43. He said, "Liesl." He said it in a voice I had heard exactly twice in 9 years of marriage. Once when his father had had a small heart attack in 2017. Once when our golden retriever Bailey had died in 2020. The voice of a man who had just been told something that his understanding of the world had not been prepared for. I said, "Garrett." He said, "There is a letter in my office." I said, "I know there is." He said, "You did this." I said, "Garrett, you did this." He said, Liesel. We need to talk. I said, Garrett. We are going to talk through our attorneys. I said, my attorney's name is Rosalind Agbayarni. Her office will call your office today. Whatever attorney you retain will work out the details with her. I said, Garrett. I'm going to tell you one thing on this phone call. I'm going to tell you because you are the man I was married to for 9 years and because, despite what you have done, I think you deserve to hear one true sentence from me before we never speak directly again. He said, yes. I said, Garrett. I knew you were sleeping with her after the Christmas party. I have known for 3 weeks. I spent those 3 weeks not because I was deciding whether to leave you. I spent those 3 weeks deciding what kind of leaving I was going to do. I said, I chose the leaving that gives me my career and gives you the consequences of yours. I said, that is the only sentence you are getting from me, Garrett. I said, goodbye. I hung up. I called Rosalind. I said, Rosalind. File. She filed at 10:15. By 11, the divorce was a matter of public record in the Maricopa County court system. By noon, Sarafina Quintero had been terminated. Edith Halsey, in her capacity as Walt's executive secretary, told me later that week that Sarafina had cried in the conference room when the Human Resources Director had delivered the news. She had asked, repeatedly, whether the decision was being made because of her relationship with Garrett. The HR Director had told her, by the careful script the outside counsel had prepared, that the decision was being made because of compensation irregularities that the firm had identified through a routine audit, and that any further questions would need to be addressed in writing through legal channels. Sarafina did not pursue further questions. Sarafina did not, as far as I have been able to determine in the 14 months since, find another job in commercial real estate development in the state of Arizona. She has, I'm told, moved to Las Vegas. She is working in hospitality. I do not know more than that. I do not need to know more than that. The divorce was finalized in May. It was a clean settlement. Garrett, by that point, had returned the bonuses he had paid to Sarafina, which meaningfully reduced the marital assets that were available for division. He retained his retirement accounts. I retained the equity I had accumulated at the firm, which had become, with the CIO appointment and the stock adjustment that came with it, significantly more valuable than it had been 3 months earlier. I kept the house. I sold it 4 months later. I bought a smaller house in Acadia, in a neighborhood Garrett and I had never lived in, and that none of his family had ever spent meaningful time in. The house has a small pool. It has a guest room I turned into an office. It has a view of Camelback Mountain from the kitchen window. I have lived in the new house for 13 months. It has been the calmest 13 months of my adult life. I am the CIO of Sterling Halsey Properties. The interim title was made permanent in July. The succession planning process for the presidency began in October. Walt has not yet announced a date for his retirement, but he has, in 3 private conversations with me over the past 4 months, made clear that the date will come within the next 18 months and that I am, when it does, going to be the next president of the firm. I am 36 years old. I am going to be the youngest president the firm has ever had. I am, when the appointment happens, going to be the only female president of a major commercial real estate development firm in the Southwest. I do not say this to brag. I say it because the path to this office ran through the back hallway of a private club in Paradise Valley on a December night in 2023, and through 22 days of saying nothing while I built the documentation, and through a Wednesday morning in January when I walked into Walt Halsey's office with a folder. The path was the work. The work was paying for itself, in installments, every day I sat in this office. I want to tell you what I learned. I learned that the most expensive thing a woman in a senior corporate role can do is announce what she knows before she has built the case. The announcement gives the men time to react. The announcement gives them the opportunity to construct a counter-narrative. The announcement turns what should have been a clean professional matter into a personal scandal that costs the woman as much as it costs the man. The silence is the strategy. The silence is the gift. The silence is the 90 days you give yourself to gather what you need to act once. I learned that the firms that pretend not to know what is happening between executives and their assistants are firms that have been quietly corroding for years and that are waiting, often without knowing they are waiting, for someone to bring the corrosion into a room where it can be addressed. The bringing into the room is, sometimes, the most useful thing a senior woman at the firm can do. The senior woman at the firm is, often, the only person in the room with the standing to bring it. I learned that founders of family-built firms, when given the opportunity, will reward the executive who brings them difficult information cleanly. The reward is not always money. The reward is sometimes, more durably, position. The position is the long-term form of the reward. The position compounds. I am the CIO because I came into Walt's office with a folder. I'm going to be the president because I came into the office with a folder in the way I came into the office. The way matters. The way is sometimes the only thing that matters. I learned that the woman my husband was sleeping with was not, in any meaningful sense, my enemy. She was a woman in her early 30s who had made a series of small, careful decisions over 16 months that had benefited her financially and that had felt, in her telling of her own story, like opportunities she was reasonable to take. I do not forgive her. I do not need to forgive her. She is in Las Vegas now, working in hospitality, and the forgiving and the not forgiving are, in any meaningful way, no longer questions that bear on my life. The actual woman I have spent the last 14 months thinking about is not Sarafina. The actual woman I have been thinking about is myself. The version of me that walked into the back hallway at the Christmas party and stood at the corner of the staircase for 4 seconds. The version of me that walked back up the staircase and said nothing. The version of me that drove to a Starbucks in Temp at 7:58 on a Sunday morning and called Rosalind. The version of me that walked into Walt Holz's office with a folder and a calmness she had not known she had. That version of me is, in some specific ways, the version of me I had been waiting 12 years to become. Garrett's affair did not create her. Garrett's affair revealed her. She had been there the whole time. The professional crisis was the architecture that finally allowed her to come out. The architecture of the corner office is now, in turn, the architecture that holds her. She is sitting in it. She is the woman this story has been about, the entire time. She is me. She is going to be the president of this firm in 18 months. She is, in the meantime, the CIO. She is sitting in the corner office on the 17th floor of a building in downtown Phoenix that her husband and his executive assistant used to walk past every morning on their way to the elevator. The office has her name on the door. The parking spot belongs to her. The view of downtown Phoenix is hers. She earned it. She is going to keep earning it for as long as her career allows. The career is going to allow it for a very long time.